This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner Trisonic. And if you're looking for podcast production support, we highly recommend them. Find them at trisonic.co.uk.
The worst question a client can ever put in a pitch brief to an agency is, why are you unique? None of us are unique. Never. The question is, why do you think you're right for my business?
Hello and welcome to the Media Leader podcast. I'm Omar Oakes, the editor-in-chief. For the time being, anyway, I'm joined today from what may be one of the last ever, in fact, it is going to be one of the last epic conversations I do on the Media Leader podcast. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by Pete Robbins. Pete is one of the industry's first ever digital media planner buyers, having done it since 1996 when Google didn't even exist. Hi, Pete. How are you?
Fine. Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
No problem. It's a pleasure. Pete has launched not just one, not just two, but four media agencies in his career. In 1999, he launched the online media agency Media 21. Shortly thereafter, he co-founded the digital creative agency Glue, which would one day become part of Dentsu. And following the sale of Media 21 to Grey Global Group, part of WPP, he then co-ran Mediacom's digital division for 4 years, sitting on the board of directors. He left Mediacom in 2005. I'm starting to get breathless as I repeat this. You've done so much. He set up the digital agency Agenda 21, which sold to Be Heard. And for 10 years, he was chair of the IPA's digital media group. He now advises and has invested in a range of digital tech and creative businesses. But on your LinkedIn profile, Pete, it coyly now says that you are, quote, doing something new in media planning and evolving the use of ad tech and data. What does that mean?
Yeah, good question. So it's a terrible LinkedIn profile, as many people have told me. It's essentially a holding thing that I've got in place as, rightly or wrongly, I'm just starting my next business, which is another media agency. It's called Project 5, and it's to do with just the range of opportunities that I think exist in the market that's super interesting, as we'll probably touch on. And for somebody like me, I sort of can't help myself.
You can't help that entrepreneurial thing. You've done it 4 times already. You've got this bug, have you, to launch new things? And
yes, and I've often thought why I've ended up down that path as opposed to maybe running another agency. And I don't really know why. It's just something that I did many years ago. And I think I'm better suited to that. And it's been relatively successful. So I think once you practice at something and it's relatively successful, I've tried to do normal jobs and I've not actually been very good at them.
oh dear,
No, it's not suited to me. So I think just that something inside me, and maybe it's the same for other people that start businesses, is where I'm going again. It's taken quite a while to get this one to the point where I can now start it, all for all sorts of reasons. But as I said, as a media planner, I still think of myself as a media planner. It is so interesting in terms of the opportunities that exist in the market. I like the idea that I know less about the art of the possible today than I did yesterday. I find that deeply inspiring in some respects, because the idea of someone coming to me with a brief and me knowing what to do fills me with dread, because I get bored really easily. So the idea of thinking, I actually don't know, but I've got to think about this and possibly come up with stuff that's never been come up with before, maybe rightly or wrongly, but I feel I can do that in my own businesses rather than in someone else's businesses. They have different strengths and weaknesses. My businesses will have strengths and some weaknesses, but it just feels like a more natural place for me to do what I do.
Yeah, well, as somebody who's thinking long and hard about launching a new business myself next year, definitely I hear you on that, and I want to ask you about that, because I think a lot of people either come into this industry or grow up in this industry where they feel that, yeah, I want to start my own thing one day. I actually remember almost a year ago, I was speaking to someone who runs a private equity fund, and in their fund, they've got 3 marketing, advertising companies. And I asked him, why do you include, businesses from our world? Is the margin that good, or, what is it? And his answer was interesting. He said, these are advertising, marketing, media is one of the few sectors in the UK anyway where it's really dynamic and entrepreneurial. There's always someone launching a new agency. And do you know what? Because remember, these private equity companies, they generally flip businesses. They want to sell them, right? There's always going to be a WPP, as you know, or a Dentsu, as you know. who is going to buy an influencer agency? Influence is still quite hot, or they were early this year anyway. There is that market there, and there's established practice, and things change so much. And to your point about getting bored, I do want to press you on that as we talk more about media planning, because as I've been covering this industry for nearly 10 years, and I feel like the more I learn about this industry, the less I understand. I mean, let me put you on the spot straight away, because it seems, a lot of the complaints about the industry nowadays is it's so dominated by big tech and centralized platforms. Can media planning still be interesting when increasingly those are the only games in town?
Yeah, I'd argue this is the age of the media planner. Ad tech is as stupid or as clever as you direct it to be. And whilst there are some very dominant tech platforms, as people like you wildly report on, and it's true, if you think about the changes that has happened in TV or out of home, probably the two channels that fascinate me the most, because historically, and this is where I offend lots of people doing TV, TV's been a very easy channel to plan, and it's not really planner, it's more of a traded industry previously. But with the advent of things like AdSmart, when it first came out, I looked at that and thought, that's a really, really simple ad server. And that comes from the bloke who signed the first agency ad server contract outside of any businesses in the US back in the late 90s. So ad serving changes the things that you can do. So when AdSmart came along,
there's a Sky AdSmart where addressable, because they have all their users' credit card information, they know where they live when they're watching Sky TV, they can target them of all kind of ingenious ways.
Yes, and that's the point. So when you start to think about things that could be possible, that technology will only do what you essentially tell it to do. So you have to start thinking about the rules that tech can do its stuff with. And at the moment, and I think we're a long way from it not being this way, the best media planners ask the best questions. My definition of media planning is really the word why. I irritate a lot of people by constantly saying, why? Why have you put that in a media plan? Why are we spending it like that? And ad tech is driven by the rules that media planners will come up with by them constantly asking why. And then you put it into that, you build that rule into that tech. And it could simply be someone logging into a piece of software. Increasingly, it's going to be people essentially writing algorithms. They might not be coding them anymore, because you can nearly talk into a piece of kit that will code it for you. But when you have a blank screen with a flashing cursor at the bottom that says, what do you want to do? You have to know why you're doing it. And media planners, I think of media planning as a prompt engineering of advertising. So if you've got a blank screen, essentially with the thing at the bottom says, well, go on then, tell me what you want to do. You've really got to know why you're doing it. And media planners in the media world are the ones that do that. I had a degree in architecture and I was awful at it. I mean, really bad at it. But I sort of did all right, because the maths was, for me, was relatively easy. I'm doing a degree with people that are artists, so you imagine the maths is quite straightforward. But the idea of an architect type approach to media planners has always appealed to me, maybe because I've done that and other people have talked about that, is you're trying to construct something that other people may not have thought of, that fulfills their criteria. In this case, it might be media budget. So if you apply that to the changes that happened in most media channels outside of just the big tech, you can do some amazing things, or you should be doing amazing things. And that's the opportunity for the better, more forward-thinking media planners and media agencies, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. You raised the spectre of architecture. I remember speaking to the people that ran the agency Byte, BYTE, a few years ago, and they sold to Dept afterwards. And they were talking about how increasingly they had hired a lot of architects to work on various accounts, and they used to specialize in providing AI chatbots that integrated with Facebook Messenger. And I was like, why the architects thing? Is that mixture of creativity and math? And so, yeah, but it's more about, actually, if you think about how you structure an AI conversation, it's a decision tree. And actually, it really helps to have an architecture's training to be able to build that out. And that just never occurred to me, that you could link one specialist field with another like that. And again, coming back to this point, how people fall into this industry. That's what I love about advertising and media, because you are able to bring in different skills and experiences to do things, even in a technical sense, to do things in culture. What do you think about the planning landscape? And I know that you're launching a business. And I presume Project 5 is the fifth, because it's the fifth thing that you've launched. Is that where the name comes from?
Sort of. I'll explain that in a second.
Okay.
I think it's related to what you're about to ask.
Well, maybe it's more of a question. I mean, don't say this because it suits your own interests as a new independent agency. But when you look at the agency world, for example, when you look at what media planners are doing, I do hear this common complaint that there are too many specialists. Coming back to how the industry is dominated by Google, Facebook, Amazon, etc. They're too kind of specialty focused, and there aren't enough generalist media planners. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no, which isn't really much of an answer. So the reason I called it Project 5 is just I feel like we're in the fifth age of media. So I've been doing this for 30 years and 2 months. Who's counting? Well, I suppose I am. And I think about things that the way that the industry worked 30 years ago when I did a lot of faxing and photocopying, and how it is now. And whilst the premise of why a brand would spend money in media hasn't really changed, the techniques and the things you can do are entirely different. That's not true. They've moved on a lot in the last 12 months, let alone the last 30 years. So it's a really difficult balance for a media agency to get, the balance of people that know how to execute in channel, as each channel has been reinventing itself, some faster than others, as well as having the people that can sort of know enough about the art of the possible in each channel, but understand how you put an overall media approach, a blueprint, a framework, and maybe then as a consequence, a media plan together to say, here's the roles for those channels, because I know enough about what they can do. I've got some specialists to ask to keep me on my toes, but there's no way that a generalist can know enough about each channel without having a specialist. But if you just have specialists, all they can talk about is their channel. So it's a very, very difficult balance that certainly for the last few years, I think all media agencies are struggling to get those combinations. And sometimes it just works and you're not sure why. And other times it falls apart and you're not sure why. And I don't know anyone who's got that right, because it changes. It's probably the hardest thing for a media agency to get right, is the balance between those two. You have to have both, but it also depends on the type of client. I mean, different clients, they want so different things from media agencies. The combinations of specialists and generalists on different clients will vary greatly as well, even within the same agency. So it's a very difficult one I don't think I've ever nailed it.
Yeah, but we've got something like 80% of media is now delivered through ad tech, and which means it's shaped by data somehow. I mean, what do you think are the most significant opportunities for advertisers and agencies when faced with that?
Yeah, so the 80% is something that I looked at before, and even if that figure's slightly out, it's the vast majority. So going back to the changes that's happened with TV and the proportion of TV that is now ad servable / addressable, it means you have more agility. And things like digital out of home versus traditional out of home, or say traditional radio versus more addressable audio, let alone what you can do in the, I would say, traditional digital channels, which again have changed dramatically from the days when I did it 30 odd years ago. So the responsibility of those that are planning the media to provide a way that your clients spend it that's worthwhile to that business. And I quite like using the word worthwhile, because everyone knows what it means. I used to say to my teams, look, if you're trying to describe what you do, think about describing it to your mate in a pub who's not really listening because you're talking about work, and don't use the words brand and strategy, because most people use the word brand strategy, don't know what they're talking about, to be blunt. But just talk in real terms. You talk about media that's worthwhile for the client's brand or business. You've got to work out what worthwhile means, which means you have to talk to the client. You have to understand enough about their business, and then you have to understand the art of the possible in media. And then, because so much of I think this year the estimate is 40 billion, we're going to crack 40 billion in the UK.
Wow.
according, I think, to the AA numbers, which is astonishing. That's a lot of money that's being spent on advertising, and it is your responsibility to try and make it worthwhile for your clients. So if you've got media that you can shape, that is more likely to do something worthwhile for your clients. That's your responsibility as a media planner. If you're not doing everything you possibly can in your media plan to prioritize spend to people that might be more worthwhile to that business and suppressing those that are less likely to be worthwhile, you're not doing your job. And at the moment, not all media is being done that way. So there is, when I talk about opportunities in market, there's an opportunity for agencies, I think, to reclaim possibly the position they might have had a few decades ago by saying, we can actually become more consultative, because if you can now go and buy the audience you want as opposed to be sold the audience that someone else has created as it was 30 years ago, you have to know why you're buying them. You have to know when you want to talk to them. You can control that more because of the addressability and most stuff's been running through software. You can understand more about the data you get back on the delivery and the actions that happen subsequently to the delivery of that media, which means you can do greater pattern analysis. Your maths can be more accurate. You can start to change stuff in a way you couldn't back then. So there's a whole host of consequences that I think as an industry we are really scratching the surface, and that fascinates me. Going back to my original point about, I think I know less about the art of the possible now than I did, because I can't keep up, and this is all I do. So how clients keep up, I don't know. And that for me is the big opportunity in media agencies, because it's what we do. We don't do anything else. So if we're not doing that, well, no one else is going to do it. So the best agencies will help the best clients do the best media. That's just a fact. So if I can play in that space, if the industry can get better at doing that, we will be more useful to our clients, and probably we can start to be paid what we might consider to be more fairly.
It's funny when you talk about marketers not being able to keep up. I suspect a lot of them don't, frankly. And also when you say, when you give advice to, when you're planning a brief, when you're giving a brief, so just explain it to me like you're explaining it to me at the pub. I literally use that same advice when I've talked to reporters over the years with headlines, introductions. Don't talk to me like I'm an advertising industry, media industry reader. Talk to me like, why is this story interesting? Say it like you're explaining it to your mate at the pub or over coffee or whatever. I think it's really important to always remember that we are humans communicating to each other, where we want to communicate stuff that is, valuable, informative, led by data, but also we respond to emotions. And why does it actually matter? Why is it going to cut through? An interesting point about agencies being more consultative. Do you think maybe it's a network agency thing, but do you think that they're too kind of bogged down? They're too held together by, it was share deals with the broadcasters before, and now all the discussion about inventory media and deals that might be taking place with digital media suppliers nowadays. Do you think that gets in the way of them acting as those consultants?
In some cases, yes. And in some cases, no, in fact. So there are some deals that, because of the deals, there's been some fantastic innovation happen. There's been some deals that have suppressed innovation, and it's not really a cop-out of an answer. But when you're faced with spending money with a media owner, you shouldn't be doing that purely because you have to, because there's a deal in place. You should really, that the whole idea of media planning is meant to be, you're picking the best media for your client. That's the whole point of being an agency. That's nearly the definition of an agency. So anything that suppresses that probably is not in the best interest of that client. And obviously people like Nick Manning, who's obviously done an epic thing with you earlier in the year, has talked an awful lot about that. He's not the only one. But I look at it from if I was doing media planning and I was told by someone else, you can't do that because we've got a deal in place, that would really bother me, because that's limited, or it's suppressed, or it's theoretically reduced the effectiveness of what we think that media is going to do. But at the same time, some deals give you access to things that are happening new in market because you've got the deal in place. So I think it depends on the nature of the deal, it depends on the way you use it, it depends on whether it liberates or suppresses, it depends on whether that deal is helping your client or helping the agency and not the client. So there's lots of nuances rather than just the black and white. Well, deals obviously must be bad. Well, not necessarily true. And in some cases, some deals are done with the client's full support because they are then getting access to media, which they probably wouldn't have done if they weren't part of that deal. So I think there's nuances to it. And I think it's going to be like that for quite a while.
Yeah. I mean, it feels on the one hand like it's just becoming, would you say it's becoming too complex for a lot of planners to navigate? I mean, if you're advising an agency, how would you advise them to balance all this complexity with, as you said before, the need for simplicity to maintain effectiveness?
Well, I'm a bit torn on this because personally I love the complexity, because if media was just simple,
Because then no one would need you.
no one would need us. Exactly, no one would need media agencies. And you think, well, hang on, if we're doing some really brilliantly complex stuff behind the scenes so that our clients, their media is more effective than their competitors, and they're paying us fairly for. I love that idea. I actually get quite irritated, which is a bit weird, when I read about stuff where people say, oh, I simplified it beautifully. And I'm thinking, if they simplified something really complicated into a story that people who aren't close to it like we are, that's fantastic. But if they're doing really simple media because they don't want to do the complex stuff, then I'm like, well, I hope you're working for my client's competitors, because we're not going to do that. Or the best agencies don't do that. But going back to the 80% point you made, as the modern day planner, you can choose more than you ever were able to decide whether you want to buy a very broad audience, very little targeting on purpose because it's the right thing to do, or you're going to buy multiple audiences all at the same time with different priorities, with different messages, because you think it's the right thing to do. You have that choice. So your ability to make those decisions is your job as a planner. Your ability then to execute shouldn't be constricted by other things. Your ability to then more confidently, and I mean confidence from a client's point of view, know that the money they've spent is worthwhile in whatever that means. That if more of us do more of that, the agencies are going to be in a better place. And a lot of that is quite complex. But that's the massive opportunity for the best agencies, because we can do that. We are better than anyone else to do that. And whether that's what's clearly going to happen is around faster, more intelligent pattern analysis. So we will understand as an industry some of the rules that I was taught 30 years ago as a media are now proved to be wrong, because back then we didn't know any different. We didn't have access to data.
Like what were you wrong about that you used to know?
So, well, it's more. So back then, so here's something I'll tell you something the other day. So when I was junior Oik in my first agency, there was a book, and in the book listed all the UK magazines, and that book, I believe from memory, was updated every 6 months, and there was 5,500 magazines in the UK. There was 2,000 B2C and 3,500 B2B magazines. And we would get a brief from a client, and my boss would say, Pete, right, I want you to come up with a magazine long list. And I'd go into a book, and there was potentially 5,500 choices. That sounds really cool. It wasn't really, because immediately you think, well, it's obviously a vast majority of them aren't right. If it's a B2C, well, that's knocked out 3,500. But you still had to go into a book, and there was these tiny amounts of information that might be one paragraph, and then there would be circulation and readership numbers. And that was it. There was no more data. And it got updated every 6 months. But you then had to somehow extrapolate from that, as well as your knowledge of the magazines that might be right, to eventually come up with a media plan. You compare that to the stuff that's talked about today, with the data sets and clean rooms and matching and, the match rates are really low. That's terrible. And you think, right, okay, what's more complicated? Is a different type of complexity. And I don't think I look at complexity and I think of opportunity. So when I hear about people, well, we need to simplify it down, I think, well, you do, but we don't actually, because there are some things that are going to get more complicated, and bring it on. That's where the best agencies can show their worth. In some respects, the more complex it is, the more excited I get to a point, because the other thing I'd say, if you're running an agency like I have and things get complicated, it takes longer, and longer is more costly. And if you are being squeezed on cost, you've got to balance the cost of longer versus the cost of versus the income you've got, and that's a really tough call.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people look at AI as the saving grace of dealing with all this complexity. How are you using AI, if at all? How do you see agencies, planners using AI going forward?
I think, like most agency people, there's the obvious thing about reducing admin. Everyone's playing around with that, and it could be simple to more complex stuff. And then at the other end of the scale, a lot of us are already using AI or machine learning in some respects through the media we've bought with the tech platforms. So whether we know it or not, we don't have control over that. We're just putting stuff in, and then we're sort of borrowing their algorithms. But I think increasingly agencies will mix and match the different types of AI you can use. And as a media agency, we're talking more about the analytical side of AI, not the stuff that generates the ads. That's not my space, certainly. And there's some obvious stuff, that anything that's going to help us analyze increasing volumes of data that's more accurately diagnosed into something meaningful. Because going back to that, you've got the prompt at the bottom. What do you want to ask? You've got to ask if you ask the wrong questions, no matter how good the AI is. So it's theoretically going to allow all of us, or rather it'll force all of us to ask the better questions, because it'll give you an answer based on that question. Whereas before we would hire data engineers and they've put it into different platforms. And I remember years ago when we first started getting ad served data, because it was American companies, all of the data for dates was American, and it was 2nd of March or 3rd of Feb. What is it? And then the numbers were going wrong. Oh, why is that? And eventually you find out that it's all American, and you say, can you change it to English dates? And they said, oh, that'll take us 6 months of engineering. You think, what? Why? I mean, this was 20 or 25 years ago. Of course, these days, that's easy. Just run that through a piece. So that's a really simple example. But you'll get people who aren't mathematicians being able to run maths-like analysis that might say, what is the confidence factor between these data sets? Did one cause that, or is it completely not? Whereas before, you need a data engineer, you need a mathematician, they'd have to run certain analysis, and it would take time and money. So there's certainly going to be things that are going to massively help. But I go back to the point earlier, I think this is the age of the media planner, because, again, I keep saying, if you ask the wrong question, you're asking the wrong question.
Yeah. What about the idea about risk? I do personally wonder whether, because of how media buying is becoming more centralized, fewer agencies, fewer media platforms, everything becomes centralized. And we talk a lot about the fragmentation of media, but actually you could argue that it's kind of centralizing in a lot of ways. And whenever you have centralization, you create risk, don't you? Because, it's like the Star Wars thing where, you create this huge Death Star, but there's one little hole in it, and you find that one weakness in that big blob, and the whole thing blows apart. So how do you think that advertisers, agencies, how do you think that they can minimize that risk as you see it?
Yeah, we could spend an hour on this. So risk for me is, because most agencies and their clients can go and buy what they want when they want. So accessibility to media in most channels isn't an issue like it might have been when I was at Mediacom 20 years ago. So essentially now, in not all, but in a lot of media, if you want to go and buy something, you can relatively quickly find out if there's inventory left against that buy. And if there is, you can buy it. And the idea of lead times that used to be abound in all media back in the day, they don't really exist. If you want to buy it for a short amount of time in stock, in a number of media channels, you can. Clearly not in all. Again, back in the old days, that didn't really exist at all. So you have this tension, if that's the right word, of you can sort of buy what you want. And on one hand, that can de-risk media because you can try stuff. And if you're able to see, because of the greater volume of output data that's as a consequence of that things aren't going quite as you hoped for, you can sort of press stop to a certain degree. So you don't have to commit to a year spend to make sure you get certain ad spots, and you have to lay it down. If you pull the money, you lose it. That's a much, much, much smaller percentage of the overall market. So that in itself de-risks spending media. And if you've got the planning right, if you've got your ad tech stack right, easy for me to say, if you've got your data engineering right, if you can see the signals, that's also a de-risk. So people have to invest in that stuff. That's a lot easier to do than even 5 years ago or 3 years ago. The sort of flip side to that is if you can sort of go and buy anything you want, if you're buying the wrong stuff, you can spend a lot of money really quickly. So your risk can go up. So it's sort of the fear of repeating myself. You've got to be much clearer about why you're spending the money you are, why you're prioritizing a certain audience, why you're suppressing others, what does worthwhile mean. I've got this whole notion. I'd love to be in a position where media agencies move from being given budgets to us being able to talk to a CMO, the chief commercial officer, which is increasingly more involved, and maybe the CFO, and say, look, let's move from a budget, and I might be splitting hairs on the naming convention on this, but to a cash flow basis where the money you spend via us is we are all seeing the same data of how that investment is recognized back into your P&L. So nothing to do with media metrics, of which mostly are irrelevant, utterly irrelevant. And that one of the few things in the industry that really annoys me is how we talk about some stuff that's utterly irrelevant to a client's business. But again, that's a whole rabbit hole.
Because about attribution.
Oh, just some of the data points that we in inverted commas optimized to. We're not. It's just like, I'll come back to that in a second, actually, because that's quite a point that's related to if we can show stuff that let's say the CFO is saying, yeah, I recognise that benefit in my P&L, then we're saying, well, why would you not keep doing that until it's not beneficial in your P&L? And what's the cadence of that? So I was lucky enough to work with Rightmove a number of years ago when I set up a TV specialist agency. We pitched him on Rightmove. And Ian, who was the marketing director there, was explaining how people buy houses in the UK. And he said, oh, people are in market for a year in the UK. And you think, oh yeah, I suppose they are. And he said people buy houses for emotional reasons. They think it's rational, and they nearly all buy for emotional reasons. And you think, oh yeah. When you think about that, and what's the budget they can afford? What's the budget they pay? More than they can afford. There's just certain, as you said, about emotional. So how do you plan for a business like that? Even it's the most expensive thing they pay. That's a really brilliant brief for a media planner to think about. But for a business like that, when could you recognise the benefit of these marketing spend? Because you and me might be market for a year buying. Well, their business is different because they make their money from the estate agents. So it's about them having a market leader position to charge estate agents. You think, oh yeah, it's got nothing really to do with people buying houses. It's their customers aren't us, it's the estate agents. Sounds obvious. So that changes the way that you might think about planning, the budgeting, the realisation of that worthwhileness of that budget back into the business. And then you apply that to all the different type of clients that could possibly advertise in that 40 billion this year. And you've got hundreds, possibly thousands of different combinations, which, going back to the point I made near the beginning, I love the fact that the best briefs I get are the ones I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hear this quite a lot. I mean, the analyst Ian Whitaker is quite good about delivering this argument about how advertising should be seen as capital expenditure, not a cost on the business, because to your point, it's linked to sales. In general, the more you market, the more you generate sales. But generally these budgets, these percentage of billings, fee structures just don't recognize that. Isn't the frank reality that if any brand entered into that sort of relationship, as you suggest, they'd have to pay you more, and none of them want to do that?
Yes. I think there was a study from the WFA and Media Sense that said there's a high percentage of clients that are more interested in paying more. And as Lord Nick Manning, I feel like I have to bow when I say his name, with the Who Cares initiative, and I was in one of the groups for that. And actually that was the business model of agencies. And one of the things we just kept coming back to was that it's on the agencies to prove their worth, like in any business. If you want to get paid more, you've got to show why. Why would somebody pay you more just because you've asked? And it sort of feels within our grasp again because of the advent of more data and the ability to process that quicker, and some of the stuff we've already discussed, to feel more confident about making a case. I actually think there will be, and this study I think said that, there will be more clients that if they want to be more competitive in their sector and they want more effective media, they recognise that they're going to need the best agencies to help them get there, because the thing's complicated, which works to us, our advantage. And they should be saying, right, I'll pay you more if you can prove what you're doing is making a worthwhile difference to the business. And we're in a better position, I think, we've ever been to say with more confidence, yes, look, we've done the analysis of the data, of your sales, of the media we're buying, and we're more confident it's making a difference. Now, how that manifests itself into what the commercials might be in the newer contracts, I don't know. I remember being at the IPA, this might be 12 years, it might be longer, I can forget, where the IPA and ISBAR have had a number of conversations over the years to say, how do we come up with something together that sets a framework that advertisers pay agencies fairly? I've seen so many iterations over the years, and we're still in a place where agencies think we don't feel like we're being paid fairly, but it's really on us to show that the work we're doing, but then come up with a mechanic where there's a shared risk. And I've tried that in my own businesses and failed in most occasions because things get in the way, or people say, well, how can I isolate what you're doing versus, if we reduce our price and our sales go up, well, it's probably because we reduced our price. And you think, yeah, you're probably right, actually. We haven't done anything differently. So it is complicated. Agencies have things in place where there is some of this happening. Most income from most agencies isn't related to that yet. And we've done a fantastic job at making ourselves cheaper and cheaper over the years. So if you're a client and you've got two agencies to choose from and you both think they're as good as each other, you'll pick the cheapest. Why would you not? But I think in 2025, 2026, the smarter brands will seek out the smarter agencies and probably say, look, if you're going to do some amazing work, give me competitive advantage, I'll pay you some more, but you've got to deliver my competitive advantage. And there has to be a mechanic somewhere to validate that. Therefore, the agency can make more money, because then we can just put the better people on the business as a classic, which means the media gets better, which means performance goes up. So I think everyone sees that, but it's a very difficult thing to crack. And it's been discussed as long as I can remember in our industry.
This episode of the Media Leader podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. For a full range of audio, media buying, and creative services, including podcast production, check out trisonic.co.uk.
I did watch, you mentioned the Who Cares conference that Lord Nick Manning and his co-conspirator Brian Jacobs put on. And the working group you were part of was fronted by the consultant Michael Farmer. And I've interviewed Michael. It's on the Media Leader. We've had a couple of interviews with him about his books, and he's a consultant as well. So let's just put that out there. He has a business that he's running, but his argument is strong when he talks about how agencies, to your point about getting good at doing work for cheaper and cheaper over the years, and as Farmer describes it, is this inability to define scope of work properly. And if I, selfishly think about what I'm about to start doing, when you put yourself out there as a small business owner, as a consultant into the world, and then this is already happening to me where people are emailing me saying, "Oh, okay, can you do this? And how roughly, how much will it cost?" And I'm very reluctant to, enter into a discussion about that straight off the bat, because, well, actually, what am I doing this for? It's because I believe I've got the experience and skills to add real value to your business in exactly the same way as you're talking about the ideal for how agencies should conduct their business, right? And but it's easier for me as an individual. It's easier for me because I've got, an individual, brand, if you like, an individual experience, individual skills, where I can rightly say that I'm unique in the market. And, if we want to enter into a business relationship with me, let's have a discussion about whether this is the right fit. As opposed to, I wrote about a piece recently where I begged the question, are agencies presenting themselves increasingly as media supermarkets, going back to this idea about, are we just buying media wholesale, buying it cheaply, selling it at a markup, and making money off of the arbitrage, which is how wholesaling works, right? And I really worry that particularly the network agencies, they're not developing the confidence to do what you suggest. That maybe, good luck to you starting your fifth agency, and maybe you are able to command that sort of paid relationship going forward. But I just wonder whether these networks can do it.
Well, partly, so everything you've said, yes. Somebody said to me years ago that he was a consultant, not in media. I work for 2 fees, either nothing or I'm very expensive. And I thought, oh, I love that idea. Can't do that as an agency. You can't say, oh, we'll do a load of work, but we're not going to. And he said, it's because I can do a little bit for nothing. And if they want me properly, they've got to pay me a lot. And he put the decision back on. I tried to use that sort of, well, it's sort of down to the client. You can do this or this, you decide. You can have the proper full-on version, but it would cost you. It's much, much easier when you're a small business to charge a premium, because talking from the one thing I've only ever done, which is the agency part, is if you are a smaller agency and you're offering a premium service, you attract a certain type of client. And they are the ones that will probably have smaller budgets, and they are unlikely to be the biggest in category. So they know they have to pay well as a proportion of spend to get a premium service. If you are a big international business, and when I was at Mediacom, I worked on some big international businesses, their requirement of an agency is very different. And they are spending, in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of millions. And in that respect, your requirement as an agency is entirely different from the sort of way that my next agency will work with different clients. And there's no way that my small agency could do what some of the group agencies do and there's no way they could do what I'm going to do, because they've got ways of working across big brands across the world where they want consistency and they want pricing, and 2% reduction in cost of media is a huge amount of money. Sort of clients I'll be talking to that have a few million quid, for example. That's not the point. They want 15% jump in improvement or 30% jump in improvement. That's where it's not right or wrong. It's just a completely different type of client agency relationship. And where a big group network business will talk about innovation, it's a completely different style of innovation to what, say, some of the smaller independents have to do, or you will do in your business, because people will ask you to do things that you wouldn't get from a bigger business. And as I said right up front, it's more of a natural place for me to exist, rather than sort of having to run a CEO of a media agency with a few thousand people in 15 markets. That's not me.
That never attracted you when you sold your agency to Grey and then Mediacom. You were never attracted to be that EMEA CEO or account lead for Unilever.
No, and I think I would have been terrible at that. I'm not political enough. I'm too.
Why do you need to be political?
Because you've got to keep lots of people happy, and you will have bosses and it's you've got to keep the spreadsheet happy. And we've particularly seen that, unfortunately, in the last couple of years, where in fact most media agencies have had to get rid of people, because it used to be like 66% of your cost if you're a London-based agency was your people. And that's probably gone up more because people have reduced some rent because of the flexibility. So your cost is your people. And if you've got to reduce, if your revenue goes down, you've got to keep a margin, and you're told to, you have to let go of some people. And that would do my head in. I'm not really a people person, as people know me. It's not my skill set. I like the product. I like developing things that other people haven't thought of. And hopefully they work. And hopefully it's ahead of everyone else. And hopefully it's a really interesting way for the clients I work with to spend the money, so that they get the benefit and their competitors wished that they were doing that. If we can do that sort of stuff, if you are a CEO of a big media agency, your job's not that. Your job is to manage lots of people, manage a P&L, maybe manage the markets. You've got to talk to senior clients. You're talking less and less about media. You're talking more and more about maybe running a business. And I don't really see myself as a businessman. I was just too fascinated when someone says, and we've thought of a new way to serve an ad on a connected TV using this data. And I'm like, oh, tell me more about that. And people are like, oh, God, he goes Pete again, asking, these relentless questions. That's my interest. So, I mean, I got dead lucky. I got dropped into Mediacom in early 2000 when they were still number 2 in the market. And I was 27. I'd been doing digital media longer than anyone else there because I'd pretty much the first planner buyer of, we used to call it online, which I ended up doing by accident. But there were loads of people there that knew loads more about media than I did. And their ability to, I always used to think about Mediacom, then it was a brilliantly run business that happened to do media. I learned so much. I was there for just under 5 years as they became second to, on billings, the biggest, and I think they remained there ever since. So I just got to work with, it was like this PhD in how to run a business that happens to be a media agency, but I was still able to, I mean, when I was there, digital was 4% of Mediacom's income, 4%. Think what it is now, it's not 4%. So I was continuously having to battle to get digital on media plans. I think a lot of people there would quite happily not have bothered.
And when you did win that argument, how did you win that argument?
Partly new business. So it started coming up a new business. So it's most agencies will change what they do because clients ask in new business. And then some agencies then rewrite history.
So did you get wheeled out to pitches as the digital person?
Yeah, and it started with literally, I wouldn't even say a page, it was half a page at the end of the pitch. And then there was a couple of pitches that specifically, back then pitches were 3 questions. How cheap can you buy certain media? And something bizarrely, it used to be the first ad in the Sun on a Saturday. It used to come up a lot. Don't know why, can't remember now. The second one was, what's your strategic view? Fair enough. And then there'll be another random question. And then I can't remember what year, but a couple of pitches came in that were rather large. And they said, and we want to know your competency in digital. So it was suddenly, Pete, you're in the pitch. I was like, is it the end? They're like, no, it's one of the questions they've asked. I was like, ooh. So that, and we won. There were a couple of pitches that we won. And so suddenly so there was that. But also the market was, albeit it was tiny, it was suddenly becoming bigger and more people were talking about it. And journalists were writing about it because it was quite interesting. It was still small. And just a combination of things meant it was, and media owners. So if you think about certainly the press titles were going, and we've got these websites and, the numbers are going up and we're making money. And so I was much more in demand, got really interesting. And then I thought, oh, this is so interesting. I need to go start another agency because it's going to take off, which it happened to do, as we all know in history. And then, but I sort of ended up Mediacom because I sold my first agency to their parent company, which was purely luck that I ended up in that place at that time. And I say, some of the things I still base what I do on was the stuff I learned in the sort of 4 to 5 years I was at Mediacom back then.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned luck quite a lot. Looking back on your career, I mean, I think a lot of people listening to this will be quite interested, as I said before, about maybe launching their own thing one day, or even if not that, being on the, in the vanguard of some innovation that's going to rewrite the next chapter in our industry's history. Looking back on how you got lucky over the years, are there any kind of learnings or advice you might have for people to, whether it's how do I sell an agency, how do I attract interest, or how do I get luckier?
Yeah, how do you get luckier? So the first thing I've been asked normally by mates of mine that are CEOs of media agencies, oh, I'd like to do my own thing. And I'd right, okay. I said, well, the first thing is you'll probably earn nothing in year 1. And they go, I can't do that. And I'm like, because if the company's doing well, you'll probably want to hire people. Because you need to hire the people to do the work, to get the next client, to hire the people. So your own earnings are very secondary to other people. And that's the first thing I say. But I also say that it's not right or wrong. I can't stress enough. I haven't been lucky enough to be at Mediacom and do my own things. They are just entirely different. And one of the ways I describe it is when you do your own business, everything's amazing or awful. I might use different words if it wasn't on a podcast. And there's nothing in the middle for me. And most people that do well in their own businesses have a similar outlook. Whereas other people go, I couldn't deal with that. I like it where nothing's too extreme and lots of stuff in the middle. And you go, absolutely. You should be in a business where there's other people, bigger business probably, where you don't have to deal with the extremes. I also describe running your own business as a 4/3 business. Yes, we're on a podcast and people can't see your face. People think,
My eyebrow just arched.
What are you talking about, Pete? And I go, well, you could literally work 24/7. I know if you're CEO of a big media agency, you could work 24/7. But when it's your own business, no one ever tells you what to do. No one ever gives you a job spec. And you have to deal with what's in front of you. You have to do all the admin related to what's in front of you. Things like, we need to buy some new laptops. Right, hang on. Where do we, you need more space. Hang on, we've got the lease for this space. Want to hire more people, we can't fit them in. When do we get out of this lease? So all of that, you've got things like making sure you invoice clients and pay people on time. You've got to deal with your existing clients and the complexities of that. You've got to make sure your product is good enough that somebody wants to pay your business, so your clients. But you've also got to think about things that haven't happened yet, so that in a future state, your business is still competitive or premium or whatever your specialism, and you're constantly juggling. So most of the time, if you're running your own business, and I think it's probably the same if you've got a big job, your decision is not what to do, but not what to not do. I've got to prioritize stuff constantly. So it's a very different way of thinking rather than working a job where someone will say, right, this is what you need to do. And you go, right, I'm going to go away and do that. And for me, that's the very worst thing. If someone was to say, I need you to go, and I'd be like, no, I need to go and work out what I think is the right thing to do. I want to make my own mistakes rather than someone else's. And I think you're probably similar with, like, you're doing this because you feel like you want to. So I think that when you do it, you have to have a tremendous amount of resilience because lots of things go wrong. And long time ago, I realized that you get some amazing news. Like as an agent, you've won a piece of business and 30 minutes later, you've had another client resign. And that actually happened more than one occasion. You think, why has that happened on exactly the same day? Why have they resigned? What?
That's the universe being kind to you. They're softening the blow the same day.
I don't. Yeah, but you think if only just have two positives in one day. So I don't know many people have started a business where they've all got amazing stories of disasters, as well as amazing stories of brilliant stuff that's happened because they've had an idea, or they just got lucky. The other part about how do you sell a business, and the only businesses I've sold are agencies, so I couldn't talk outside of that. Although I have invested in some businesses where one of them we're going to try and sell, and it is different, but there are some similarities. Is the one thing an agency needs to have to sell is a story. People ask the finances, and I go, no, it's not the finances. Finances need to be in shape, and if your finances are naff, no one's even going to bother to talk to you, right? Whether they want to buy you is your story, and if you can tell your story, guess what? We work in advertising in quite a compelling way, and you're interesting enough to them because you either fulfill a gap of something they want that they can't do, or they're doing a bit of it, but you're doing it better, and you can literally accelerate their offering. If your numbers are all right, that's fine, but actually your value and the multiple you might get, particularly in the agency space, is the ability and the quality and the story that makes them literally sit up and go, oh, that's interesting, which is really difficult to do.
Clearly, it's really difficult to do. I don't know if I should say this. This is going to border on unprofessional, maybe. But you know what? I'm leaving. No, but every year I've covered this industry for years now, and you get sent press releases and you get sent pictures for thought leadership and blah blah blah. CEO wants to talk about what's in the news today. Google, deprecating cookies. Yes, no, might never happen. Something like that, and it just again, I found myself rejecting all these things over the years on the basis of what actually is the point of this commentary, or what's this idea, or what's different about you. And to your point about the need to tell the story, I mean, as journalists, we're constantly thinking about what's the story here? What's the story? Like I said before about kind of pitching an intro to your mate in the pub, or someone over coffee. It's just the inability, it seems like, for so many businesses, despite it being the advertising and marketing freaking industry, just the inability of so many people to tell their story, which, is why I feel I could help a lot of businesses in that regard, because I've seen it from the other side. And I just despair sometimes at just how, particularly when you talk about, I sympathize when someone like you says, I'm a product guy. I think about how things work, and I think, maybe stop me if you think I'm completely wrong, but I think there are a lot of people out there in the industry, and maybe nowadays where the industry's become more technical, there are a lot of product people who launch their own things and want to sell these businesses. But it seems to me that they don't have anyone that's actually helping them to tell that story about why this matters, why, if it is unique, or maybe it doesn't have to be unique, but it's going to serve this particular market, this particular customer. I just don't see a lot of that. And I don't know if it's down to a lack of expertise, a lack of confidence, or maybe people just think, oh, this product's so great, it's going to sell itself. I mean, what do you think?
Well, when you just said why twice then before you said what, which is very telling. So why have I built this product? Why would someone else be interested? And it, going back to something I mentioned earlier about I'm the person who asks why, and I irritate people. Why have you done that? Why have you created that technology? Why do you think somebody would be interested in using it? And when you ask why, and they answer with what, as opposed to why, again, irritating Pete says, hang on, no, I didn't ask that. I asked why, and you're telling me what. And that's where somebody that can express what they've got, like you, could help somebody like them. Because normally if they have built a piece of tech, they're very techy, and they'll come at it from that tech point of view. I remember when I sold my first agency to MediaCom, there was a business called DoubleClick. And DoubleClick, I signed the first agency ad serving contract out of America with DoubleClick. So I went to MediaCom. The guys at DoubleClick knew me pretty well. Came in and they said, right, Pete, you're now at the big media agency. We want to tell you about this media planning product that we've worked on. And I immediately thought, oh no, they're an ad serving business. And this guy who was head of engineering in America had flown over. He was meeting me and two other people. And he went through this whole thing. And I thought, it's terrible.
And just to be clear, this is long before DoubleClick sold to Google.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's a separate business. And this was maybe 2002 or something. And I still remember this. And I said to him, right, why have you done this? He said, well, because people can log into this and it can help their media planning. And I said, I don't think it's going to help any of our media planning. And why have you lot done this? He said, well, because we build advertising technology. I was like, yeah, but why have you done a media planning product? And he couldn't tell me. He just kept on telling me what it was. And I said, who built this? He said, oh, it was all of our engineers. Well, there's a whole bunch of engineers. I said, did you talk to any media planners? He said, well, we're doing that now. I was like, right, but it seems like you finished the product. And he said, yes, we built it. And I was like, at the end of the circular conversation, I said, I don't think we're going to use any of it. And he said, we've just spent $30 million building this. Now, in their world, they'd built something that was going to solve a problem that didn't exist. And in my world, I was thinking everything they've built is irrelevant because they hadn't really worked out why they were doing it. And I still remember that one as because it's back in the early days of when tech was starting to become more in the industry. And I think that I've seen that over the years, certainly from a tech point. I've built this tech that's unique, and you think, no, never say it's unique. The worst question a client can ever put in a pitch brief to an agency is why unique? None of us are unique. Never. The question is, why do you think you're right for my business? What makes you right for my business? So the people's obsession with unique, and you see that in a lot of technology. We do something that no one else does, and I think I probably won't want it then. Very rarely do I see a bit of tech and think, do you know what? Yeah, that solves a problem I didn't know existed. Because normally the people that can write the tech are too far away from the media. If they came and said, we've built this and we're looking for people to help shape it so we can effectively write the story whilst we're selling to you. That's a much more interesting thing. And if they want to sell that business, they have to have that skill set. And if they can't, they have to find somebody who can come in, ask the whys, write the answer to the whys that allows them to get both somebody interested, but also you'll get a higher premium if you've got a story as to why your tech or your media or your audience is more valuable than somebody else in the market. Same with agencies.
Yeah. It's interesting, DoubleClick, which obviously became the engine of Google becoming the money-making cash machine that it is nowadays. I remember even go back to the start with Google. I mean, you'll know this. I mean, you were doing digital planning from 1996 when, dial-up, noisy dial-up, and you could barely do anything on the internet. It's just, I'd be amazed to go back into a time machine and meet you then and kind of see what you were doing.
Well, I was making it up more than I then. So Yahoo had one salesperson in the UK. His name's Tom, still a mate. And of course, Yahoo had this tiny ad at the top of their page that was 33 pixels high. At the time, no one could tell me why it was 33. It was so small you could hardly see it. I used to get faxed from the web servers that the websites use. I mean, we used to meet on a Tuesday night, the whole industry. There was about 25 of us, and about 22 of those were people on the sales side. And it was called Boob Night, which stood for Buy One's Own Beer.
Oh dear.
Yeah, I didn't
You
come up
wouldn't
with
get
that.
away with that nowadays.
No, it's one of the sales. But we were just all making this stuff up. So I'd get faxed from their web servers the calls to the ad file that I'd sent them, and then I'd type it into a spreadsheet. So when I talk about digital media planning then, I was literally, there was no one to ask. I was just making stuff up. And I was very lucky that the business I went to then work for, they were the biggest buyers of online media in the world. There was 30 of them in America. It was called Modo Media. And I was their European media person. And again, I just lucked out because they wanted to hire someone in London, and I think there was two of us. They basically tossed a coin and I got the job. So you got exposed. And then we pitched and won this, one of the businesses we won was this online bookshop that no one had heard of over here called Amazon, which sounds impressive. No one had heard of it. It was just a bookshop selling books on a website. I was just making up media for the launch of Amazon. And you think, back then, I probably knew nearly all of the art of the possible because there wasn't much you could do. It's like saying I did press, there was only 2 titles. Like, it wasn't really that difficult. It was just we were doing it. And going back to the point I made earlier, I love the fact that if you're a really good planner, you realise there is so much stuff you don't know. It's liberating. And maybe it's the same for you. You think, it's a good story, but I'm going to have to really think about how I write it. I want to find out. I want to get what the point of the story is. Not, I just want to copy and paste a press release that someone sent me that can't be a good job for you. And that whole thing about the inquisitive nature and coming up with something and a point of view, I think that applies to whether you're a journalist or doing what I do.
Pete, fascinating. Thank you so much for taking part in this epic conversation. And if we do build that time machine, I'm definitely going to go back to 1996. And just one kind of thought you just reminded me of, talking about how it was back then in Google, which was launched a few years later. A lot of people talk about nowadays, again, like talking about how Amazon sounds so impressive in retrospect. And Google, people talk about, the page algorithm, and it was just so much better. And obviously Google was going to become the dominant search engine today. And people forget actually that why Google became so popular so quickly, even though there was already, Alta Vista and Yahoo, as you mentioned, much bigger search engines already. It was because there was nothing on the Google homepage. There was nothing there. You go on the homepage and it's just Google search bar. That's it. They didn't have, like all the other search engines, they just bombarded ads. And it made the load time really slow. Whereas Google, bang, straight away. You just search for what you want. And the monetization, stuffing the ads, that came in later. And they waited until they were dominant in order to really force that through. And I think when you're in an emerging market, I think that's a big lesson as well, where you try to over monetize, over commercialize too early. It can really harm you in the long run.
Yes, agree with that. And that's exactly what's happened in things like commerce and retail media. The last thing that the retailers all say they're going to do is ruin the customer experience, because then the customers will go elsewhere with having too many ads. And they're all doing relatively good jobs at that as they tried to work that out. But that's a perfect example. And you're right, Google was just, I remember when it came out, we were like, Google? What a stupid word. And then people...
Well, they actually made a mistake. So it meant to be spelled Google, as in the number, the 100 zeros number, GOOGOL, but they actually got it wrong when they registered the company name. So
again, that's a fantastic story. Whether it's true or not, I just love stuff like. And then the quality of the product. It was their story was the quality of the product, and then the rest is history, as they say. So the ability to know why you're doing something and stick with it, as they clearly did, and they got it right. And as you say, some of the other ones you mentioned, like Alta Vista, don't exist, and they were one of the biggest back in the day.
Yeah, I always had this dream of reviving Jeeves somehow. Maybe he'd be an actual person, but that's one for a different show. But anyway, thank you so much for coming on to the Media Leader podcast. When you do launch Project 5 and you're ready to speak more about it, please do come back on. I won't be here, but please talk to my colleagues. But until now, thanks very much. Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. This episode was edited by our production partners, Trisonic. You can find and listen to all our episodes on our website at themedialeader.co.uk or wherever you get your podcasts. But just remember, please do subscribe to be notified when we release our next episode. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm editor Omar Oakes. Our executive producer is Jack Benjamin.